Good morning. Thank you all for having me today. I'm very excited to be here. I come here every now and then, and it's an honor to be on the other side as well, just as you say. Fantasy. I'm Siobhan, and as I said, I have a business together with my business partner Faye, and we connect art with businesses. So when Daniel called me to ask me to speak here today on the topic of fantasy, I was like, why do you want me here on stage? And he was like, yeah, so the thing that you do not create things yourself, but you try to build the bridge between something that is very not creative in general and something that is very creative. So I'm very curious how this talk will end up, and if you, in the end, feel inspired by bringing fantasy into businesses yourself. I want to start with a newspaper article that was in NRC last week. As many of you know, being creative or being an artist can be a struggle every now and then. So NRC, it said artists with a side job, the article was talking about how many artists here in the Netherlands are struggling to pay their rents just by doing their business, and that they oftentimes work side jobs that are not necessarily creative, just in order to keep up with daily life. And we talk a lot with artists. Most of the times we have new meetings with artists that we've never met before every week, and it's very difficult for artists to understand how to actually make a link with being creative all the time and also earning money with it. And the artists that we talk to, oftentimes they're like, yeah, but I want to do what I really like to do 100% of my time. I'm like, I own a business. I would love to do what I like to do 100% of the time. But in theory, I spend 20% of my time doing administration. I spend a lot of time having meetings with Faye, which I really like, but oftentimes I also prefer not to do that. I spend a lot of time on communication, writing newspaper articles or press releases or whatever, just to create some buzz about whatever we're doing. And if I think about it, how much time I spend on the things that I actually like to be doing, which is talking to creative people just like you, if it's 10% of my time, I'm very lucky during a week. So we also try to inspire artists to think about all those things differently, because in the end, those 100% of my time, I'm running my own business. And I have a mission in running my own business, which is create a sustainable cultural field. And in the end, those 100% of my time are dedicated towards that end goal, and not necessarily all those different things that I'm doing. So this is our reality. But then there's also the corporate reality. Which is very sad, actually, if you look at this picture. There's no fantasy at all. There's a lot of people that go to their work every day, not even doing something that they really like to do, right? So they do not even have that noble mission. They just spend 100% of the time doing something that they really hate. So where's that balance? And so what we do with Art is we bring part of that creative world into the corporate world to just have everyone be inspired a little more. Which brought Daniel to ask me to talk about basically how we do that in this world. I'm very curious about you. So which one of you recognize yourself in the story of that artist that struggles a lot trying to make ends meet? That's not that many. So how many of you are actually working as a creative? So, and are there people there have their own company trying to make ends meet as well? Oh, that's a little more. Okay. So are there also some sales executive, business developers, people that try to do what we're doing as well? Not that much. Just one. And last thing for a reference for me, how many of you have to pitch projects to potential clients and struggle with that? I started off working as a creative, I think 6-10 years ago. And I was kind of in between the creative part and the non-creative part. I started off doing a lot of studies. I had some technical backgrounds. I did in interior design, and I hated all of it until I ended up studying cultural studies. And I was basically combining economics there with the creative part. And I started working at an art producing firm, and kind of fell in the gap between the creative field and the clients. But in 2011, I got very, very frustrated because there were so many creative projects that could have been realized, whereas just if there had been any funds in order to do that. So yeah, I kind of thought, okay, why isn't it work? Where is that connection being lost between the creative arts field and the corporate field? And I kind of felt that I was not able to actually get more insight in that here in the Netherlands, because all cultural institutions are struggling with it, artists are struggling with it, and there's not necessarily a clear answer. So I decided to get that knowledge in New York. Not necessarily because that's where all the knowledge is, but because the system there in collaborating with the corporate field is so different than the Netherlands, that I just wanted to see, okay, how do they do that there, and can I be inspired to think about that differently? So what happened is I started requesting a lot of funding from different organizations. And some of them were really able to put me in a box and say, okay, yes, we can put a stamp on this because we really recognize this as something that we are funding. But then there's also a lot of things that you're kind of in between everything. You know, like a lot of us do not fit into just one box. We do a lot of things. And I struggled to get my funding ready. And Daniel asked me to talk about this a little bit, because it being limited in finding the things that I could do made me actually very creative in finding a different solution. So what I did, I needed a lot of money, and I decided to crowdfund part of it. And a lot of people ask me, so how did you get people to actually give you money to do your studies? I have no idea. I think I gave a lot of talks like this. I was like, I really need this knowledge because when I come back, I want to make the world better. I want to make a lot of creativity possible. But I really thought about the people that I was going to ask for support, which were friends of mine that are also struggling to get their funds ready. It's family that, unfortunately, I do not have a rich sugar daddy or uncle or whatever. And I really needed those small chunks, small amounts of money just to get me through those 2 years. So what I did, I built a beautiful Wix website, limited means, sorry. And I created a web shop there where I put all the products that people could actually help me support my life with. For example, I'm not really sure if you can read it, but there are museum tickets on there, or like food baskets or whatever, and it actually gave people an understanding of what they actually were giving money for. And each time I went out to get a cup of coffee, I would text one of my sponsors and be like, oh my God, thank you for this amazing cup of coffee today. But it also helped me to actually tell my story differently, because a lot of the people that were supporting me do not necessarily have any affiliation or affection for culture. And then often I get the question, so what did you do in return? So what I did in return, it's very hard to see here because of the light. I wrote a blog, and on that blog I wrote about the fun parts. For example, here, this is me on my last day interning at the Guggenheim. But I also wrote about the shitty parts. For example, when the European Bank decided to change the value of the euro, which actually cost me, I think, approximately 8,000 euros just in a day. They were just was gone. So I also wrote about that with a lot of crying pictures and stuff like it works very well. So I was there and I had an amazing time. I learned a lot also about the things that I wanted to learn because I was talking about corporate sponsorship with a lot of cultural institutions. For example, at the Guggenheim, it's very common just to write a letter to companies saying, "Hi, could you please sponsor me $2 million because we have this awesome project coming up." Whilst here, people already struggle by asking in general. And then at some day, I received this magic phone call of Faye. Faye and I have been working together here in the Netherlands before I left. And she called me and she said, "There are so many opportunities here and I'm done with my job. It makes me very unhappy. I want to quit my job right now and start a business. Are you in?" I was there and I still had 6 months to go. So I said, "Sure, when should I come back?" She said, "Yeah, well, I'm quitting my job right as of today, so please make sure that you're here." No, let's say in 3 months, something. I was still graduating by then. But obviously I said yes, otherwise I would not have been there. So what we do is we connect art with business. And what does that mean? It basically means that we see opportunities everywhere. Everywhere we walk around, we see opportunities for creatives such as you to actually do something there to make life just a little better. But our overall mission is that we actually have the scope to see all those opportunities, whereas sometimes if you're working in a creative process, it's very hard to just go out there and find new clients. And so we say we connect art with business, but art is very broad for us. So part of what we do is we find sponsorships for cultural institutions, but we also help office or interior architects find artists to actually build furniture with together or do lighting with, or so the art is very broad in that sense. But yeah, I was actually still graduating by then, as I said. So for us it was a challenge to actually use a type of like the process of doing research actually as a tool to also further your business at the same time. So I wrote this research on corporate sponsorship of the arts, and the obvious thing to do was to talk with a lot of cultural institutions that are struggling with finding sponsorships. But I actually was very curious about the other side, because apparently there's a gap and there's a need from the cultural side. But then how do you bridge that gap to actually find that connection with the corporate field? So I decided not to talk with any creative or cultural institution because we already know their story. It's in the paper all the time. I decided to talk to all those corporates and to see what they're struggling with. To actually ask them, okay, so where do you miss that connection? Where do you lack that, for you, the actual trigger to do business with creatives? Because oftentimes people that are actually doing the things that we should be doing are not as creative at all. There are people that are inside an organization that are thinking of creative strategies that we probably would have had done a lot better. So, where does it leave us today? This is the fantasy world we live in. So when I was talking to Daniel, I was describing him. So our fantasy world would be that you have a client that brings you a big box with gold, and they tell you, "We trust you. Do whatever you want to do with it." In reality, unfortunately, this almost never happens. It happens every now and then if you're very well established, but in theory, it hasn't happened to us yet. So where do you find the balance between working for clients and doing your own private practice? So a lot of artists that we talk to, they're like, if we work for a client on a commission piece, we lose part of our authenticity. It's a very common thought nowadays that doing commercial work or doing your own creative work are not something that can be in line with each other, and also that doing commercial work is often lacking the quality of doing your own work. And this is a conversation that we have with artists over and over again. And the best example that we have, which is also the most obvious example, is The Night's Watch, which was commissioned. But now, so many years later, we recognize this as Rembrandt's signature. Like you actually see his signature in this piece. So we think that the biggest challenge is not necessarily doing commission work, but actually trying to hold on to your own signature while doing commission work, which is a challenge, but also it creates a boundary. So being limited also enhances that creativity. Another thing of working commercially as a creative. I'm not really sure if you will recognize this tweet. It was a hype a while ago. And it's hashtag tegen de bakker. And it's talking about how if companies approach creatives in order to do commission work or to do an assignment, that they oftentimes try to negotiate so much that actually the worth or the value for the creative is kind of lower down to zero. So how do you make sure that while doing commercial work, you're not actually wasting time or not developing yourself as an artist? We all know that there's a lot of arguments that companies make that be like, it's so good for your network, you get new exposure in new channels, or we don't need exposure, we need to pay our rents, right? So how do you negotiate that the right pay for the right assignment? So we always advise the creatives that we work with that if you do a job that is not paid the amount that it should be paid, you should always make sure that there's something else that is actually worth that value to you, which sometimes can be exposure. But you can also negotiate exposure. For example, like they can say you have a new audience, but you can also say, okay, so if we have that new audience, I want all of those people's email addresses so I can actually approach the people that could be my potential clients. Or, okay, so if we're doing a presentation, if there's a nice movie to be shot, can we distribute it amongst our own channels? So there's a lot of ways that you can negotiate all those other things that can actually work for you. One of the examples that we had recently was an example for a project that we did at Cambridge Innovation Center. Cambridge Innovation Center became one of our first big clients, and they've been working together with Kruivanger architects to do their interior design. And they had a very big challenge because so Cambridge Innovation Center they're a corporate startup hub, basically. So what they do is they provide offices for startups in order for them to meet investors, learn from each other in order to grow. But we're here at the Industriegebouw. There's a lot of places that do the same thing. So how do you create identity? So we collaborated with them on several interventions with different local artists, which was something that they really wanted to do. And they had this one challenge that Rotsganse, which is an artist collective from here, solved for them. So they had very long corridors that were actually it was very, very hard to find your way around them or to communicate where you would meet your, I don't know, your Tinder date in the office or your actual appointment, whatever. So what they did is they, instead of having wayfinding arrows, they commissioned the artists to actually think differently about the wayfinding and to create something that was also communicating the brand value of Cambridge Innovation Center, which is about being a startup, being innovative, going forward, but also the harsh reality of actually starting your own company. During the design process, they started thinking about, okay, what does it mean? This means that something should be versatile, and you should be able to change shape very, very easily. And they were thinking very difficult about this assignment. Whilst they were selected because they have humor in their work, and actually it's not very hard to understand their works. Like if you pass by, if you're an art lover, you can actually find more information about it. But if you're just someone working in the office, you just want to have your environment to look great. So what they ended up doing is they created mirrors that are representing all different things of being an entrepreneur. So there's the pizzas for working late, but also here making money, finding your targets, or fantasizing about future jobs. And the reason that I brought up this example is that they were very limited in their thought process in the beginning, but eventually they used those limitations in order to create something new that they themselves had not expected that they would be able to do for such a corporate client. So how to crack the client code? It's a book that Frank here in the audience gave me at some point. And it's about understanding your client in order to actually find a connection, to start a conversation. And this is something that we normally start off with, because we have a lot of creatives approaching us. They'll be like, oh, so you find assignments from the market, right? Can you find something for me? Well, unfortunately, that's not how it works. We talk to clients first and we find out what they need. And then we try to see if there's an artist or creative or whatever who can actually meet that need. Are there any illustrators or graphic designers here in the audience? Yeah, here, your hand lifted first. So what do you see when you see this?
Color.
Color, yeah. Texture, yeah. Are there any sales? There were also salespeople here, right? No? Oh. No. So from my perspective, I'm a runner. I love to run. These are the New Balance shoes that are designed for the Rotterdam Marathon last year. So it says Rotterdam right here, and there's a nice pattern of tulips, which is very Rotterdamish. So what I see when I see these shoes is a huge business opportunity, because people from Rotterdam tend to be very passionate about their city. And there's also a lot of people running in this city, and there's also a lot of people willing to spend money on doing their hobby in their city. Here, these tulips. Seriously, when I first saw these shoes, I wanted to bang my head on the table. I was like, there are so many people that could have done such a great job in just designing this tiny pattern here inside that shoe. That would be a huge impact on the sales of such a product. So those are the tiny things that we already see opportunity in. But how do you communicate that? So what would be the added value for New Balance to actually work with any creative here in the audience? It's very easy. It's just to drive up sales, because all those people that now did not buy these shoes would have probably done it if someone cool from here in the city would actually have thought about why these shoes are relevant to be sold here for the Rotterdam Marathon. If anyone here in the audience has this guy's number that thought of this, let me know. Another example. There's a lot of organizations that are doing social activities, and that they are really searching to find a wider audience that is actually thinking about their event or their product. So one of our most recent clients is at CHIO, which is the Center Hippique, and they last week they found out that they have won the bid to host the European Championships here in 2019. And I have no idea if any one of you has ever been there, but there's stalls in Kralingen. I've never been there, and I've been living in this city for a very long time. And one of their challenges is to get out of their ivory tower and to actually go inside to the city, because this is going to be a huge event. And so we approached them and we'd be like, okay, so you have this huge challenge because you need to get out of your comfort zone, you need to actually talk to a wider audience, you're doing horses. Not everyone likes horse riding, but everyone likes horses. Do you remember when you were small and you were fighting with your sibling in order to get on the horse on the merry-go-round? I remember. So there's like some association that we all have, but if you're the manager of this event, you do not necessarily think of opportunities like that. You need that creative to help you think out of the box. But we started off by communicating the added value for them. Not what we want to do, but what we could add. We can add, working together with creative, we can add that association that everyone recognizes himself in for an event that is pretty elitist. Another example what we had was for say, this is the bathroom at Say. I already talked about how we help them build their identity here in Rotterdam by collaborating with local artists. But this was a very interesting challenge because these bathrooms were already done. And the architect said, okay, so we're not touching them because they're in good shape and we do not want to waste any money on that. So we convinced them that having bathrooms that would be spectacular would actually make it fun to, if you're sitting in your office thinking about new ideas all the time and you need to go to the bathroom and just be like shocked or out of your comfort zone. People are actually now making selfies at the bathrooms. And so they're actually doing part of their sales for their spaces based on their bathrooms, which is actually pretty awesome. Another interesting challenge that we really see a trend coming up is that there's a lot of companies, especially tech companies or product development companies, that are spending a lot of time on research and development. There's a lot of things happening on sustainability and on innovation, and all of that is happening behind the scenes. And obviously you need people with creative minds to come up with that innovation, but then how do you communicate all those innovations or innovation processes to the wider audience? Because obviously it's very important for all of us to know that Philips is doing a lot of research and design and that they're doing, that they're trying stay on top of the game. So this is an example of a project that was on display during Dutch Design Week this year. And I have a secret note. It's by Simon Rycroft and Paul Thursfield. And we really love this work because it was an interactive work. Have any of you seen it? Yeah? Did you like it? Did you play around?
I didn't play around.
You didn't play around? No. Were you inspired by the setting?
I just walked by it, so sorry I didn't.
So it was a circle with this LED lighting, and then the circle here in the middle, it was the trigger for the lighting. So if you would walk around in the circle, you would interact with the lighting that was surrounding it. And what we thought was very interesting, that this is a very creative way of using the imagination of creatives in order to communicate research and design, because obviously there's interactive lighting, but then what do you do with it? And people do not, it stays very intangible until the moment that you actually give it a face. So this is also something that we see a lot of opportunities in for collaboration. So how do we convince clients to do something big? This is a project that will be opening on December 2nd at Damrak, Amsterdam. And it's part of a renovation project of a huge building. And when the developer started talking, they were looking for a very small intervention. But sometimes small is good. Sometimes small creates the impact that you want something to have. But sometimes you need to convince a potential client that in order to actually have impact, you either need to invest earlier or make a bigger gesture. And so they were able to create everything that is in this facade, from the flooring unto the walls. But then there's also the question of quality. right? Investing in quality costs an investment. So how do you convince people to actually make just a tiny bit more effort, in order to create something sustainable? So here they decided to work with very sustainable materials. There's glass mosaic, there's terrazzo flooring, there's golden chandeliers. And the rationale behind that was that you're not only investing for something for now, you're investing in something that needs to be ready and usable for the next 100 years. So it's also in terms of what's in it for the client. Sometimes it's very hard to convince them because creativity is often something that is being budgeted out first. But then if you can actually make an argument why people should invest in something that is more sustainable or more thought through in order to actually create the impact that you want them to create, can eventually result in something amazing. So these are different ways how we try to link creativity with different types of clients. I hope your fantasy is a little bit inspired by these collaborations. I wanted to give you 5 takeaways, the things that we always start off with in collaborations. The first one is to find common grounds, because not every match is a natural match. Some matches you should just let them go, because if it does not feel like a match, you're going to force it, and you're also going to lose your impact. And then the second thing is always stress relevant for the client, and also from the client perspective. So not why you want to do it, but why something's in it for them. We also always notice that it's very hard, very useful to find an internal ambassador. It's also oftentimes very hard. But you need someone that understands why you're doing this and why you want to do this, also from the creative side. Because once you have that someone that's vouching for you, it makes the entire process a lot easier. And then also, it takes a lot of time to invest in relationships. And those times are oftentimes forgotten. Like, you go to a network meeting and you talk to a lot of people and you're like, why did I do this? It was such a waste of time. Faye and I argued about this one when we first started, because you have the things that you need projects now, but you also need those projects in the long run. And eventually you want to collaborate with people that understand what you do and why you do it. And in order to do that, you need to get the word out there. And especially because we really like to talk to each other and tell each other how creative we are. But in order to find business, you need to go out there and go into random, very awkward conversations that oftentimes are actually very useful. And then the last thing, and that is more for people in order to be able to pay their rent. Creatives oftentimes try to negotiate from their needs. They think about, okay, if I do this project, I can probably pay my rent this month and half of next month. I will be working on it for 1 month. That's a good deal. No, that's also not the way your business or your client on the other side of the table thinks about this. He is like, okay, so if I pay this artist the least amount of money possible, my revenue rises a lot because we create a lot of impact, and that's how we do it. So that's why we always say, okay, negotiate the value for your client, because if their value, your added value, is that they increase their revenue, you're worth that pay. So you should just negotiate it from that worth. So those are the 5 takeaways that I wanted to give you today. I hope it inspired you. Don't forget, these are the Rotterdam Creative Mornings hashtags for the social media. Spread the word. Thank you.